You're listening to From the Chair, and I'm your host, Mike Hamilton. Join us each episode as we talk to athletic directors from across America. We're going to talk about topics like leadership, career development, issues of the day, and I can promise you we're going to have some fun along the way too. So sit back, listen in, and let's dive in. Let's go. All right, welcome into season 3 of From the Chair. Was checking my board today about folks I've interviewed, and strangely, even though we've gone through 2 full seasons, Gloria is going to be the first commissioner that has sat in the chair for the interview. I've interviewed Tom McMillan and Daniel Donahue from WBCA, but this is the first commissioner interview, and we've got some more actually coming behind you here. So welcome in my guest today, Gloria Nevarez, who is the commissioner of the Mountain West Conference. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really
appreciate you sitting in. I know this is a busy time of the year as we're wrapping the summer and getting ready to launch into a fall season, and there's probably never been a busier time for conference commissioners. So we've got a lot I want to talk about on that front, just college athletics in general. But I do find it intriguing, the different routes that folks have into the field of college athletics. And it seems like there are some nuances that are the same every now and then, but then there's some differences. And I found in reading some background information on you, something that I found interesting. I'd love for you just to share. You know, it's sometimes it's a relationship, sometimes it's a mentor, it's a coach, as you're at a particular school or whatever. But if what I read is correct, you know, you're going to leave the state of California and move to Massachusetts to play basketball for UMass. And somewhere along the way, the process of declaring your major got conflicted. And instead of being in marine biology, you ended up in sports management. And, you know, be interesting to find out if you still have interest in marine biology or thinking about where that would take you today. But give us a little background on that. I think that's pretty interesting.
Well, yeah, I think that decision was pretty much moot as soon as I chose to go to UMass Amherst, which isn't really by the ocean, versus, you know, the California Bay Area, which has several programs that are actually right on the ocean. But yeah, to this day, my husband and I still spend a lot of time scuba diving, but there's no science about it, just recreation.
Yeah. And so obviously UMass has got a reputation in sports management. And by the way, I'll take a step back for just a second. When I worked at Wake Forest, you know, Wake Forest is located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, but there is a Wake Forest, North Carolina, where the campus was from the 1800s until 1953 when they moved the campus to Winston-Salem. And there are stories Dad as coach that was successful back in the day named P. Ed Walker. And he would have his prospects come by train to Durham, and he would show them Duke University as if it were Wake Forest campus. And that's all. He just did a flyby, right? And then when they would come back in the fall, they would find out they were at a different place. And I guess it's probably because the campus was still being built in Winston-Salem. But you didn't have one of those moments, right, where you thought you were going to do the marine biology thing and found out that maybe it wasn't exactly like the computer touted it?
Well, I was recruited to play basketball at UMass, and I took my recruiting trip late in June. And so I had never really lived in a real winter. I'm, again, from the California Bay Area, and so it didn't really register until fall of that year when I was going to class and the first snow started to fall that I'm like, wow, this is different.
Yeah, quite different for sure. So you actually graduated Cal Law, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So this is a softball question. Most people that listen to this know, at least part of the answer, but I'm curious as to your perspective. How has having a law degree benefited you most in your roles that you've had with commissioner, with actually conference offices?
Well, you know, I was at law school at Cal, and in my second year, when you start to interview for jobs with firms and kind of pick your path, I really was interested in kind of staying around, being involved in sport, and I didn't really know what that meant. And I bopped down to the athletic department at UC Berkeley, and those were the beginning days of compliance offices, true full-time people dedicated to compliance. And at the time, there was one person in the compliance office worked responsible for 27 sports and over 900 athletes. And he happened to be an attorney, so I was able to work for him and get credit toward my law degree for a couple of semesters. And it really opened my eyes to the way a law degree can really help, especially in the field of compliance, which then merged into contracts, sponsorship contracts, game contracts, and really just helped me enter a field at maybe a higher level than I perhaps normally would have without the law degree.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and I'm sure in today's world, just the understanding for, just baseline knowledge in the legal field as you work through contracts and the such, it's got to be incredibly helpful. Ross Bjork and I were talking one time. He said he felt like athletic directors needed. He actually was. I don't think it was serious, but he was sort of making the case for co-athletic directors, right? One of whom is like, almost like a general counsel, law degree background, that kind of thing, strong administratively, and then another who clearly understands the external notion of the athletic department and that some days you're in the entertainment business and how do you generate revenue and both of those distinctives, though around for a long time in college athletics, have really risen to two of the most critical pieces of success in college athletics today. And I wanted to talk a little bit about get you to sort of your juxtaposition on you mentioned you worked on a campus at Cal, obviously you were at San Jose at one point, worked at Oklahoma, and then you also have worked at the West Coast Conference, I think before you went to Oklahoma, and then you came back as commissioner and served there and did some really cool things, which we'll talk about, and then obviously became the commissioner of Mountain West. Um, you have some folks who start their career on campus and they never leave campus, some who start in the conference office and they never really leave the conference office. Then there are a variety of folks who have crossover. And I'm interested in your perspective of what would you say you've learned on campus that has really played an impact on your ability to have success as a commissioner, and then vice versa, your role in the conference office and having been on campus, being able to talk the language and understand maybe some of the bureaucracy that comes with being on campus. Um, that is an interesting juxtaposition. I'm interested in your thoughts there.
Well, as you've described and as Ross described, the job of athletic director has definitely changed over the decades. And I think the same is true of conference offices. I think we were begun as entities that primarily scheduled, assigned officials, and sold some media rights. And we've evolved into full on marketing, promotion, multimedia companies these days. And it's really interesting, the evolution and what we do now versus what conferences were doing when I first started. I think it's really, really important to have some time on campus to, I mean, what a lot of people don't know about conference commissioners is we have very little legitimate authority. There's only a very narrow vertical in which I could, determine this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. 95% of what we do is through vote of our council or a board of directors. And that is serving up the information, trying to lead the group to a consensus, and guiding the group to what I think is in the best interest of the league. And so, really understanding the daily life on campus, the challenges, especially with athletics embedded so deeply in the academy of higher education, it's unlike any other business model, really, because we have that juxtaposition of this kind of athletic business in the academy. And it's what I love about it. I love working with the young people. I do miss that about being on campus. We don't get to know the teams and the coaches as closely as you do on campus. But what we do in a conference office certainly has a wider ripple effect, not just one coach, but all 12 coaches or all 12 athletic directors, SWAs, FARs, or whatever the case may be.
Hmm. So anytime I hear somebody has Oklahoma on their resume, I have to ask about Joe and working with Joe. There's some that call him affectionately the Big Oak or something like that, and the number of folks he's got in senior athletic administration around the country that have done some time there in Norman and learned from what goes on there. And the thing that's interesting to me, Gloria, is that there's no common theme in terms of personality traits. I mean, there are folks who have been on the internal side of the business, compliance, external, and everything in between that have come through Oklahoma and have gone on to lead in this industry. And there are a handful of folks, Kevin White, Mike Alden, some others, but Joe certainly is one of those that's got a large number of folks who've been through Norman. How did you end up at Oklahoma, and then the experience that you had at
Yes,
Oklahoma?
certainly. And that oak tree reference, I had heard that those of us who have come from the Joe Castiglione tree of management refer to ourselves as J-corns, which I thought was really fun.
There you go.
I actually, yeah, when President Brand was the NCAA president at the time, and he started a DEI committee to look at issues within the NCAA structure surrounding diversity um, and inclusion. And so I was named to that subcommittee as a representative of the West Coast Conference. And I happened to be on a subgroup with Joe Castiglione, and of course, very much impressed, in awe, got to know what a great guy he is. And then I was looking at the trades or whatever the ticker is, and noticed that one of his senior associates had left to be an AD somewhere, which is quite common at Oklahoma. And so I just wrote Joe a note saying, "Hey, I don't know if there's a fit. Here's my resume, but if you think there's something I can contribute, you know, I you're one of the guys on the short list that I have of people I'd want to work for." And 6 months later, I was in Oklahoma.
That's awesome. How long were you there?
3 years.
Yeah, and I know you had a myriad of responsibilities, and then you went back to be the commish of the WCC, right?
No, my first stop back was with the Pac 10 at the time, and I
Yes. Yeah.
spent
Yeah. Yeah.
8 years there. Uh, when Larry Scott took over, he revamped his leadership team, and I came in with four others um, as his new leadership team, and was at the Pac 12 for 8 years.
I just turned 60 this weekend, Gloria. My memory gets a little jostled every now and then, so
I'm with you.
uh,
I'm with
I
you.
did I did remember that. One of the things that I find interesting, because I have interest in diversity and representation in these jobs, is the work that you all did in the West Coast Conference around the Russell Rule. And in essence, I don't want to miss here, but just assuring that in every final candidate pool, member of an underrepresented group was a part of that pool. And I would say that you have been and were considered a leader in that effort. And and I'm interested in the genesis of that work. And then, even though you've moved on to another league now, just do you have some stories of success that you've seen in looking at what's been done?
That was a really interesting time. We had our big summer meetings like many leagues do in June, and it was immediately after the murder of George Floyd, when the nation was very focused on issues of inclusion and equity. And so our presidents and our student bodies are very, very active and use their platforms. And our presidents really wanted to respond with more than just statements, that, hey, we support, tweet, and then that's it. They really wanted to make meaningful and lasting change. And the concept of a hiring commitment had been bouncing around in the back of my head, and it really seemed to fit the WCC. They have small private schools primarily on the West Coast, and one of the strengths is the consistency of culture, because people in those athletic departments stay there for 10, 15, 20 years, which is very unusual in college athletics. But also, when you have a smaller department, it doesn't give you an opportunity to churn as much as some of the larger athletic departments. So it really came about pretty quickly. There was a lot of alignment. The presidents really liked the concept. The athletic directors, basically, their feedback was, we kind of do this mostly anyway, but it would help us justify doing more national searches on some of those entry level positions, or in areas where maybe the athletic director is maybe not as directly involved in searches as they would be with your premier high revenue sports. Um, and so you asked about one of the learnings. I I had an aha moment about, as we were talking about accountability, and there was three pieces to it. One, public accountability, and published our grades and hiring. There was the board would review every year if anyone didn't meet the rule and perhaps reasons why, and talk about repercussion. Um, but also, what I learned is if you have one school missing the rule across several different hires, that's one type of issue. But if you have several schools who basically meet the rule in every other hire, but in one vertical, say it's an assistant tennis coach or an assistant rowing or assistant golf, and several schools aren't able to meet, that's a different issue. That's a pipeline issue.
Yeah.
And once you start collecting the data around this, you realize there are areas where perhaps outside entities or even the conference office could serve to help connect pipeline or provide resources when schools have openings in those areas in which all schools struggle. Who, and by and large, all schools are behind the rule, they're aligned, they're trying. We've had schools even hire outside consultants to try to diversify some of the pools in some of these narrow verticals and still struggled. So that was a really interesting aha moment about when you collect the data, really seeing not what the problem is, but also where.
Mm. So let's talk about conferences for just a moment. I was talking to somebody at the University of Pacific the other day, and we were talking about basketball success, athletic success, and started thinking about the success of the West Coast Conference. And I live in Nashville, Tennessee, so I'm in the Central Time Zone. I'm not in the Eastern. And then I was as we were anticipating this interview, thinking about we have so many clients that are in the Mountain West, good folks, and really great places to go watch athletic events, right? And really good followings, and I find myself, saying, hey, I wish I had more exposure to that. And I know you've worked very hard to get additional exposure for the WCC, and obviously you've got a lot of that going on in Mountain West. You'll have a new contract in media coming up here over the next several years. But how much of that kind of thing is a part of your job as you think about the different things you're pulled into every day?
That is a big part, thinking about how to expose our brand to a national audience. And certainly our linear television contracts help a great deal, but we know our value to our linear partners is our time zone. And so we'll get late tips, late kicks. And so there's a lot of strategy behind how do we catch folks up to speed if perhaps they didn't catch the end of the game or stay up late to watch what's going on. We also, at the Mountain West, pretty innovative. We're the first league to have a linear television network and ended up not surviving, but there isn't a person that isn't kind of bummed we didn't keep that going.
Yeah, 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 for sure. So, not your first rodeo in the conference office, but it's an interesting time if you're going to use rodeo reference. It's an interesting time to be in the rodeo, given the time that you have now come along into this, next phase of college athletics. And I was mentioning to another a person this morning. We were doing an interview. Look, college athletics has been around for a long time. It's going to be around for a long time, and there have been puts and takes. There have been hard times. There have been good times. There have been times where you scratch your head and go, "Hey, is this going to make it?" In the early part of the 20th century, they tried to ban football, right? And so, and you've had everything in between. But right now, between conference realignment talk, the NIL, where that's going and how it's so fluid and is changing almost, at least weekly, if not daily. And I know you can speak to that, certainly in some of the work you've done. In the transfer portal, there's a lot to handle. And you mentioned earlier in the conversation how so many of the decisions that happen on a campus are actually not necessarily in your hands. But in these areas I've just discussed, while realignment and media contracts are certainly in the hands in some ways, they're not in others. And then the same holds true for NIL and the portal. Um, you're a steady force because this is you've been through this before. My question is, because you have been through it before, your assessment of, has everybody got their hair on fire a little bit and it's really not as bad as we think, or is it just like, hey, this is an interesting time and we got a lot of work to do. I'm curious what you think there.
Definitely the latter. I mean, we talked about my connections with the Pac-12, and I'm very, very close with a lot of folks there. I have the utmost respect for it's a 108-year-old league that is looking like it'll be no longer, and that just breaks my heart. I really think this is one of the big sea changes in the industry. I don't think we've seen this type of change um, in recent conference realignment, but the it Stanford is the number one athletic department 20 years running, voted by the Learfield Cup or whatever it's called now, and they're without a home. It really has, we really need to take a look at what is going on and why. And to your point, a lot of it is outside of our control. And I certainly understand the pressure between working on campus, especially at a school like Oklahoma, where it takes a lot of resources to have that kind of excellence and success year after year and to provide all the great support for the student athletes. And certainly the right now main source being media dollars. And sometimes those interests don't align, sometimes they do, but I certainly don't judge schools for making the decisions they do, but it really is unfortunate in my mind that the Pac 12 met its demise these past couple weeks.
Where's the balance, Gloria, between meeting the needs of the institutions, uh, revenue capabilities, et cetera, and making sure that you have what would be considered the opportunity to have a viable and successful athletic program, and so revenue is a true thing, versus the student athlete experience as it has been over time. And now we've got this additive over here of the name, image, and likeness, which we know has been helpful, but in some ways needs maybe some, I can say this, I don't know, it needs some more barriers, around it. Um, do those two things, are those two things, the idea that we've given student athletes more of an opportunity in that space, but yet because of some other issues, we may be sending student athletes across country and maybe having a detrimental effect on student athletes. uh, I think you probably sit in a unique place on that question.
Well, and certainly the campuses are making these decisions in order to provide the best student athlete experience possible, to continue to fund all the support programs and to provide all the resources that you need to vie for national titles. That doesn't come cheap, for certainly. Um, and at the end of the day, I think we judge ourselves on the student athletes having a great experience, graduating, being productive citizens in society, but also in competing at the highest level. And sometimes that means more travel. Um, Especially in postseason, you see quite a bit of cross country. Doesn't mean, I know these leagues are working on how to minimize it during the regular season. But I think national level competition is something that we just need to embrace and think about as more of the norm these days. I think name, image, likeness is really, really tough. I'm 100% behind President Charlie Baker's um, platform as far as needing Congress's help to level set all the different state laws out there. I still believe that the NCAA is capable and able to regulate name, image, likeness, but we can't do so in the face of all these different state laws.
That makes total sense. And that's like herding cats a little bit, right? But it makes total sense. And I am looking forward to seeing what President Baker can do on their front. And certainly he's got the platform to do it, given his history of success in that arena and across the aisle, right? So it'll be neat to see where that goes over the next little bit. Okay,
Well,
so
he
wrapping up,
solved the.
just so I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say he solved the Boston Tea issue during Snowmageddon. I think he can handle the NCAA.
There you go. coming down the backstretch here, I do want to. I would be remiss if I didn't say something about, this is 25th year of your league. You're the second commissioner of the league. You're following Craig Thompson, who was the commissioner for a long, long, long time. And so, number one, how are you guys as a league planning to celebrate the 25th year? Number two, um, do you still look to Craig for, hey, what happened? Why are we doing this here or not? That kind of thing. And then how do you set your own course as a commissioner?
Well, certainly everything Craig has been to this league, he was he was the first and only commissioner for 25 years. And so during my first couple months, he definitely was on speed dial. He was been so gracious with his time and advice and expertise, and very much thankful and appreciate everything he's done. He's built an amazing league in the Mountain West. And I think one of his biggest legacies is being on that subcommittee that helped finally get through the expanded playoff, but also protecting the ability for those that aren't the Pac, well, we're Pac 12, Big Ten, SEC, ACC, and um, in order to get into the playoff. So it's the top six league champions. Now, certainly, if the Pac 12 is no longer, that needs to be reevaluated, but always having that access point is a really important thing because, we have an opportunity, our best team, to get into the expanded playoff. And that's really important.
Mm, yeah, setting your course for your vision for the future. You're really in the early stages of it. Everything's very fluid right now. Have you had the chance to sit down and are you having to just sort of deal with the hottest fire right now, or have you had a chance to sit down and start to plan the course for what's ahead?
Well, since I took the job in January, conference realignment and expansion has been the hot topic. But we have also just brought a final draft of a strategic plan, a 5-year strategic plan, to our board of directors. We're very excited about it. We went deep, wide, about 10,000 points of feedback in one-on-one interviews, focus groups, surveys, student athletes, media, all our stakeholders. So we're very, very pleased. The board really appreciated the work, and so that's going to go into effect in public here in the next couple of months once we clean it up, dress it up, and roll it out. But also concurrently, we're doing a brand study, and we're working with the firm Global Prairie to really take a deep dive, hand in hand with our strategic planning, on who we are, what we represent, and does that show through in our brand? And if it does, how do we amplify it? If it doesn't, how do we really step up our marketing and branding efforts to represent the great thing that is the Mountain West?
Mm. Well, great conversation as I knew it would be, and you're kind to take the time out today to spend the time with me and the hundreds that will listen to this in the weeks ahead. And I just want to say a quick thank you for joining us, and I'm glad you're on the forefront of the leadership in the NCAA, and you obviously have great experience, and both on campus and not, as you've alluded to. And I know that will serve you well as you are a critical piece of the decision-making process here in the days to come. So thanks for joining me, Gloria.
Well, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to be the first commissioner, and appreciate all you do for us in talking about the career path, because it is a fun one and definitely worthwhile despite what's going on right now in college athletics.
All right. Um, Folks, thank you for joining and listening From the Chair each and every week. We appreciate your feedback. You can find it across all of our social media channels. We hope you'll send us suggestions for guests or things that you want to see approached and asked about. We're happy to do that. And we'll see you next time. From the Chair, I'm your host, Mike Hamilton.